November 9th, 2002, 20-year-old Josh Guimond was attending a small party on his college campus, St. John's University. At around 11:45 p.m., Josh slipped out and his friends assumed he had simply gone to the bathroom. However, Josh never returned that night. This wasn't cause for concern to his friends, who knew that Josh only had a 3-minute walk home. This quickly changed, of course. There was a mock trial practice the next day, and Josh was supposed to show up, but he never did. An investigation into the young man's disappearance soon began. There's a great podcast called Simply Vanished that covered Josh's case, and their episode on him has plenty of information about the investigation. For the purposes of this video, I'll skip those details and focus on the most recent development in the case that occurred just last year. The authorities announced that they had investigated Josh's computer and found numerous strange photographs of seemingly random men. They are still working to identify the men in the pictures in the hopes that they may be able to provide some more information on the disappearance. The theory that was posited by Unsolved Mysteries is that Josh may have been talking to the men online and went to meet up with one of them on the night in question. If this theory is true, then the question becomes, was one of these men responsible for Josh's disappearance, or did he vanish on the way to meet one of them? If the former is true, then one of these pictures shows the face of a killer. One who has gone unidentified for over 20 years. Hopefully the authorities can identify each man in this set of photos and answers about the case can soon follow. With any luck, maybe justice will also be served. 29-year-old Nancy Ann Penner lived with her boyfriend, Jeff Jeffries, in Paradise, California in 1983. Nancy had 2 children. Omar Penner was her son from a different relationship, and Yana Jeffries was her daughter from Jeff. Don't let the name of their hometown fool you. Nancy and Jeff's relationship was certainly not what I would call a paradise. According to the Charlie Project, the last memory Omar has of his mother was seeing Jeff shoot her in the bathroom when he was a child. He then watched his mother run out of the house holding her wounded arm. The police confirmed Omar's memory when they found a bullet lodged in the bathroom cabinet. However, this particular act of violence was not what ultimately led Nancy to her fate. On October 31st of 1983, Nancy attended a Halloween party at her friend's house. She never arrived to the party, and nobody ever heard anything from her again. It seemed she had simply vanished. Several weeks later, Nancy's brother attempted to contact her in order to invite her to Thanksgiving dinner, but she never responded. He reported his sister missing on December 19th. According to Jeff, he had come home one day to find blood in the house and Nancy missing, but he had simply never reported her disappearance. On December 22nd, just 3 days after the police were made aware of Nancy's disappearance and also Nancy's birthday, Jeff took both of her children with him on a flight to Hawaii. The details and reason for the trip are unknown, but they returned at a later point in time, and Jeff left Omar with some relatives in California and left Yana with his stepsister in Iowa. Omar was eventually adopted. In 1986, Jeff committed suicide, ending any hope the authorities had of gaining more information from him. His suicide note cited a breakup with an unnamed woman. Nancy's case had very little evidence for the investigators to work with, and it quickly went cold. Omar had stated that he believes his mother's remains are either buried somewhere in a remote part of Butte County, California, or at the bottom of a mine shaft in the same area, but this theory has never been confirmed. Unfortunately, it seems as though Nancy's case will never be solved. Trevor Angel was a long-haul truck driver who transported food shipments between Canada and the United States. He would drive meat shipments to America and produce shipments back to Calgary, Canada. Eventually, Trevor grew tired of his job and wanted to move on to something else. Being a truck driver took away from the time he was able to spend with his wife and son. In September of 2000, he told his wife that he was planning on doing one final trip to the United States and back. In a cruel twist of fate, this last trip would be the last time anyone ever saw Trevor Angel. According to his friends and family, Trevor was known to enjoy drinking and gambling, although he rarely got a chance to pursue his interests. However, Trevor found a spot called Whiskey Pete's on his route to Los Angeles. Whiskey Pete's became a regular pit stop for Trevor. On September 22nd, he stopped at the bar and casino and vanished shortly after. His truck was found abandoned in the parking lot with his wallet inside. The wallet still contained his license and credit cards, although the cash was missing. The cargo he had been hauling was intact, but the truck's refrigerator was out of fuel. Further investigation revealed some more disturbing details. Trevor's ATM card had been used to withdraw money on 9 separate occasions between September 22nd and the early morning hours of the 23rd. The amount of money withdrawn constituted Trevor's entire paycheck. A waitress at Whiskey Pete's remembered serving Trevor at around 10 a.m. on September 22nd when he ordered oatmeal and paid with pocket change. Witnesses reported seeing him later that day in the parking lot, looking sick and disoriented, and asking for help. Trevor's movements following these unsettling details are unknown, and the same can be said for his fate. Many questions have come from the accounts of his final visit to Whiskey Pete's. Had somebody forcibly withdrawn Trevor's money and stolen it? If so, why did he never notify the authorities? Even more disturbing is the question of what happened to Trevor that caused his disorientation and apparent sickness in the parking lot. Did he have some kind of innocent sickness, or had he maybe been poisoned by an unknown third party? Sadly, the answers to these questions will likely never come to light. Trevor's wife legally divorced him after his disappearance and eventually remarried, with her new husband officially adopting her son. Even though she has seemingly moved on with her life, she has always kept the same phone number, just in case Trevor is still alive and attempts to contact her. Hopefully someday he will do this and prove to the world that he is alive. If he doesn't do this, however, we may never know his fate for certain. On January 27th of 1996, 18-year-old Sarah Spears left Club Bayview in Claremont, Australia, and called Swan Taxis from a phone booth. She lived in South Perth at the time, but she requested a ride to Mosman Park. 3 eyewitnesses reported seeing Sarah walking by herself near Sterling Highway, and they also remembered seeing an unidentified car stopping next to her. When the taxi arrived to pick her up, Sarah was nowhere to be seen. Her case was taken to the Major Crime Squad within 48 hours of her disappearance, but things would only get worse. On June 9th of 1996, 23-year-old Jane Rimmer was out socializing with her friends. They had started the night at the Ocean Beach Hotel, then moved to the Continental Hotel, and finally Club Bayview. There was a long line at the club, so Jane's friends decided to catch a taxi home, but Jane decided to stay. She was last seen waiting in line on the security camera footage, disappearing shortly after. On August 3rd of that same year, her nude corpse was found by a family that was picking flowers in Willard. After this disappearance, the police knew they had to step up their game. They created a special task force called Macro to investigate the 2 cases. On March 15th of 1997, 27-year-old Ciara Glennon was out for the night with her friends, making a stop at the Continental just like the previous 2 victims. 3 men saw her walking alone next to Sterling Highway at around 12:30 a.m. They reported that she interacted with a light-colored car that pulled up next to her. Shortly after this, she disappeared. Her partially clothed body was found on April 3rd by a bushwalker. This 3rd disappearance confirmed to the authorities that they were dealing with a serial killer. The Western Australian government offered a $250,000 reward for information leading to the arrest of the unknown slayer. During the investigation, much suspicion fell upon Perth's taxi drivers because each victim had been in a situation that may have involved the taxi. Fingerprints and DNA samples were collected from countless taxi drivers, but these efforts never conclusively proved a killer. It was discovered that many taxi drivers were actually unlicensed, and hiring standards for taxi companies were subsequently raised. 78 different drivers who had criminal records were also fired. The detectives eventually revealed that fibers found on Jane Rimmer's body had come from a VS Series 1 Holden Commodore, one of the vehicles spotted on the night of her disappearance. Numerous different suspects were looked into by Macro during the investigation. A public servant named Lance Williams had exhibited suspicious behavior around the time of the murders, including driving around Claremont repeatedly after midnight. After a period of intense pressure from the police, they deemed he was no longer a person of interest. A murderer named Bradley Murdoch was also briefly considered a suspect before the authorities realized he had been in prison at the time of the murders. A serial and killer named Mark Dixie was considered as well, but he was eventually deemed to have no connection to the case. Finally, the police arrested a man named Bradley Robert Edwards for the murders of Jane and Ciara. He had previously been charged with aggravated assault, breaking and entering, unlawful detention, and aggravated. He ended up being charged with all 3 murders, and he appeared before a judge without a jury. The prosecution revealed that 2 of the victims had defensive wounds, and Edwards' DNA had been found under Ciara's fingernails. Edwards had also worked as a technician for telecom at the time of the murders, and he was known to drive work vehicles after hours. A security guard recalled seeing one of these company vehicles parked outside the Karrakatta Cemetery on multiple occasions. Fibers from the bodies of both Jane and Ciara matched the carpet of one of the vehicles Edwards had driven. The judge eventually found Edwards guilty of the murders of Jane Rimmer and Ciara Glennon and said that he was also most likely involved in Sarah Spears' disappearance. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years. In this case at least, justice was served and the families of the victims got their answers. It's still disturbing to think how some people can contain such evil that they would do things like Edwards did. Stay safe out there, everyone.